is our home. No one's alone. There are treasures to find. I'll walk with you. We'll talk stuff through. Bring all your heart, soul, and mind. I'll step out of what I know. Meet you somewhere in between. I will listen to hear the bell. It's when it's stolen from you, stolen from me. La 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 la. Yeah yeah. La 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 la. Come here estranged, leave here changed. Find something human to share. Propose a toast to what means most to everybody everywhere. And I'll step out of what I know, meet you somewhere in between. And I will listen to love, hear the bell. It's when it's stolen from you, it's stolen from me. La 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 la. La 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 la. Yeah yeah. La 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 la. La 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 la. Us and them, we are one. Beautiful race under the same sun. La 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 la. La 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 la. And I'll step out of what I know, meet you somewhere in between. And I will listen to love, hear the bell. It's when it's stolen from you, it's stolen from me.
Welcome, everybody. This is the Everyone's Agnostic podcast. That's a song called Tolling for You, and that's a song that I wrote and recorded and performed. A friend of mine asked if I'd feature some of my own music, and there you have it. I'm Cass Midgley. My co-host and I, Bob Pondillo, are interviewing today Roger Wolsey. He's the author of the book Kissing Fish, Christianity for People Who Don't Like Christianity. I'm excited to show a bit of a contrast between last week's guest, Slink, who was probably the most atheistic guest we've ever had, and this week is the most Christian guest we've ever had. Roger is an ordained minister in the Methodist Church, as an MDiv. Roger brings a Christianity that is swallowable for me. He gets down to the kernel of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus. In the latter years of my Christianity, I regarded Jesus as a humanist. Roger's approach is very humanistic. His book is very humanistic. It's actually been accused of being humanistic, and he sees that as a compliment. He even refers to the Bible as something that needs to be sifted, the wheat and the chaff. And so cafeteriaism is right at home for him. We have some technical problems throughout the show, and I just ask you to bear with it, because the show is worth it if you can just tolerate some of the technical difficulties. I like how Roger, I've often referred to Christianity as having been hijacked, and he uses that term. Some of the things he's up against he calls theological terrorism, and some of these preachers that show up on college campuses and condemn and poke at the students for being promiscuous or drunken, and it leaves a lot of work for him to do to clean up after they're gone as a campus minister. There is something very theistic about Roger. He does acknowledge a God that has feelings and emotions. He goes a little beyond just the ethereal, agnostic version of the ground of being, or this untangible and definitely unanthropomorphic God that we leave a little space for in agnosticism. No, he connects with a being. So he's definitely a theist. So we went from the most atheist guest we've ever had to the most theistic guest we've ever had. It's a fantastic interview. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so today's guest is Roger Wolsey, and I don't know how many of you have Facebook friends that are barely friends, but that's Roger and I. We've never met face-to-face, and somehow we became friends. We've got 14 mutual friends, and I just enjoy his post. He's the author of Kissing Fish, Christianity for Those That Don't Like Christianity, and is considered, I think that's kind of a part of a movement called progressive Christianity. So, Roger, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. I'm a United Methodist pastor, and I serve a campus ministry at the Wesley Foundation at the University of Colorado in Boulder. I've been doing this particular ministry for the past 9 years, though I've been in ministry something like 17 years. And in my work as a campus minister, I work with young adults in Boulder, which is in a increasingly sort of post-Christian kind of town. There certainly are Christians here, but there's a growing movement of spiritual but not religious or none of the above, and fewer identify as Christian. And partly in response to my context, but also my own journey, I've become advocate of progressive Christianity, which is sort of one of the Reformation movements taking place within Christianity at this time. And my book, Kissing Fish, Christianity for People Who Don't Like Christianity, is sort of an introduction to progressive Christianity. I sort of think of myself in some respect as a Gen X version of Marcus Borg's work. A lot of his books have sort of stopped me in my tracks several times. Well, why bother to write since he's already written it in many ways? But I'm reaching folks that maybe he's not reaching,
right? And
saying things in a sort of a Gen X sort of way of saying things.
Isn't that true of writing, though, in general? And we could always say, well, somebody else has said it and said it better than me. But yeah, you're and I'm glad you mentioned Marcus Borg, and I know
John Shelby Spong,
and
others.
And Crossan. I know
Dominic Crossan.
Dominic Crossan.
Yeah.
These are all people that were part of my journey. And just so you know, Roger, I was a Christian minister, non-denominational Christian minister for over 20 years. And that whole time, I, too, had a lot of questions and conflicts with modern Christianity. And little by little, I deconstructed things, at least in my own mind, but because I needed a paycheck, I couldn't really come out of the closet that I didn't believe in hell, I didn't believe in the inerrancy of Scripture, and I didn't believe in substitutionary atonement. And so when those things came out, I pretty much lost the confidence of my flock, if you will, and I had to go elsewhere. The emerging movement, and I was thinking that you and I probably been at emerging conferences together and just didn't know it. Brian McLaren was a big part of my journey 15 years ago, and so when you say it's a college ministry, what campus are you on?
The University of Colorado at Boulder.
All right.
Did you go to ILIF? What school did you go to, Raj?
Well, for undergraduate, I went to McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Great school.
And my seminary work was at the ILIF School of Theology in Denver.
Very good. Very highly regarded school, too. Yeah, great.
So I guess my journey is sort of a parallel to maybe the two of you in that I sort of see progressive Christianity as sort of a postmodern influenced evolution of mainline liberal Christianity of the modern era, whereas emerging Christianity I see as a postmodern influenced evolution of evangelical Christianity. And certainly McLaren, as you mentioned, is a key voice in that movement. they're similar in very many ways. They're just different starting points and lineages. And I suppose the differences might be that progressive Christianity has more consensus around the full worthiness of women in leadership, probably more consensus around homosexuality not being a sin, and maybe more consensus that Christianity isn't the one right, true, and only way, and not everybody needs to be a Christian. Although I'm seeing more and more overlap. At this point, both movements have been going along well enough now. I'm actually seeing a blurring of the lines and not seeing too much distinction, and there's a whole lot of folks using the words interchangeably at this point. And I used to think that mattered, but it matters less and less.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
One of the things that I run into as a post-Christian is I am trying to navigate that tension that I feel about, I love Jesus, I love what Jesus did in my heart, and I try not to live as one regretting or shaming myself for, my history or whatever.
For being human.
But just saying, hey, this is part of what made me, this is where I come from, and there's no denying that, and I want to just embrace that. But I'm also sometimes wondering if religion of all sorts isn't a detour from the simple point A to point B that secular common sense ethics, etc., that could give us. And I know that you have a perspective that says, no, there's great value in this tradition. I guess I'm asking you to sell me on that for a second.
So unfortunately, for whatever technological reason, I maybe heard half of that. So I'm going to kind of connect the dots in my mind what I think you're asking me.
Okay.
Let me restate it. Are you asking me, there's enough information out there now and enough mind change and perspective and awareness that that God is really big and really broad, and Christianity is merely one well to draw from, and so why even stick with that one well?
That's a good question, whether it was my question or not. Yeah, no, that's it in a nutshell. I just want you to sell me on the value of that of the Christian tradition and what it brings to the table that's going to make the world a better place.
Okay. Well, so as a progressive Christian, normally I don't find myself having too much of a concern or priority about selling people on Christianity. If there's truth in it, I believe it sort of speaks for itself and sells itself, and I don't need to be too much in the sales job. But I do tend to consider myself an ambassador, and here is the way that I'm finding myself feeling enlivened. I feel salvation, wholeness, body, mind, spirit, relation, vocation. Here's how I am being inspired to get up in the morning and get up and do more good. And it's working for me, and I know it's working for others. I'm aware there are other wells that are inspiring others, but this one is working, and it's working well enough that I'm running with it until it stops working for me. But so far, it's continually inspiring and challenging me, motivating me. Now, what is it about that does that? Well, if you focus on the Jesus tradition and the sayings attributed to him, the teachings attributed to him, the way and example and actions that we see attributed to him, that's 3 powerful years of amazing shaking of trees, making a ripple in the pond of life, in sort of comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable, and pursuing reconciliation and justice, and challenging worldly would-be powers that be, and lifting up a godly way. There's so much, to my mind, self-evident prophetic goodness and truth and obvious, wow, yes, if people were to live this way, wow, what a lovely world it would be if we could live this way. I think it sort of sells itself, and people mostly read those actions and teachings and ways of Jesus and go, yeah, there's something about that is truly compelling, and boy, wouldn't it be nice if more people could live this way.
Yeah, well, and it sounds like, Roger, that you're talking about the kernel of Jesus, the kernel truth, the core, the beautiful thing about the Gospels, and you and I both know, and everybody knows, that beautiful kernel is often piled under leaves and trash and clutter of things, other scriptures, other narratives that are less appealing and less helpful and maybe even barbaric. And if to clear away the leaves and to look right at this kernel, does that sound like part of what you're trying to do in your book and in your work?
Yes, I would very much say so. Sometimes I describe progressive Christianity as an emphasis on the religion of Jesus and much less so on the religion about Jesus.
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, what truly was his way of being, and what inspired him, and what motivated him, and how did he teach, and how did he walk his walk, and how did he teach and preach and do his thing. And if you focus on that is plenty to work with for a lifetime.
Right, I think you're right, yeah. And it's only when we feel the need to tether it to everything else. So we've been talking about this phrase cafeteriaism, where it's been criticized over the years that, you just pick and choose the scriptures you want, as if that's a bad thing. But it sounds like in order for you to get to the kernel of Jesus, you really do have to do that, right?
Yeah, and one of my, I do a lot of blogging, Huffington Post and recently Patheos, and one of my most successful viral type blogs that I wrote was 16 Ways Progressive Christians Interpret the Bible. And that's got, hundreds of comments and thousands of shares. It's apparently struck a chord. And I argue in there that all Christians pick and choose which portions of Scripture they interpret literally.
Right. We're already doing it,
simply admit this and share how and why we do it the way we do. So, yes, I think one has to do, separating of the wheat from the chaff. And he does, I think, model that. When he quoted Scripture, he intentionally lifted up some things and cut certain things out, obvious editing of portions of theology that he didn't care for, and said, maybe you heard this, I say this. So he's pushing back against his own tradition.
Yep.
And that's a very Jewish thing to do, is to wrestle with the Scriptures. And frankly, Christianity in this day and age could do well to remember our Jewish heritage and engage with our Scriptures in ways that our Jewish brothers and sisters do.
Yeah. So, Roger, let's go back and start with your childhood, your religious upbringing, background. Tell us about that.
Well, interestingly, my parents met at the Wesley Foundation campus ministry at the University of Kansas in Lawrence. So I sort of owe my very existence to the work that I'm doing now. That was in no way planned, but life did unfold that way. So they were United Methodists. I was born in '68, which is the year the United Methodist Church actually became the United Methodist Church due to the mergers of two previous denominations. Mm-hmm. Probably one of the first infants baptized in that denomination, along with my twin sister. And we were raised at a place called Hamlin United Methodist Church in St. Paul. I feel like the upbringing was particularly oppressive or stifling. I didn't feel smothered like some people do, and then have a natural reaction against it and to run away. But I do recall taking confirmation seriously and realizing the truth of John Wesley's teachings and Jesus' teachings, and sort of looking at the congregation on Confirmation Sunday and realizing, oh my God, I see a ton of hypocrisy and people dressing up in suits and spending a ton of money on maintaining a massive pipe organ and massive stained glass structure, and where's helping of people? And I sort of became an atheist the very next Sunday. And as the years went by, I softened a bit and sort of shifted to more of an agnostic mode. And then eventually I learned more about all the actual work that church was doing with the Hmong and Laotian population in the Twin Cities that were merging there as refugees, and the actual feeding of people on a weekly basis, and things I just didn't quite know, and sort of realized that I was maybe becoming an a-churchist rather than an atheist, and sort of did my own solo way of being Christian for a while. But then my second semester of my junior year of college, for whatever reason, there were it's a small school in McAllister, and at that time there were only two campus ministries. One was a more evangelical, rah-rah, Jesus kind of campus ministry, and one was a contemplative thing called Compline, and it was all student-led, and we sat on the floor in a circle and sang songs and did a little litany and had prayers and took turns presenting a little message and had cookies and cider afterward. And I started valuing, like, oh, wow, this shared way of talking about Jesus and trying to live like Jesus is better than the solo way. And in fact, I came to realize that I really can't do it very well on my own. So I sort of realized, oh, there actually is a value of doing it with.
Yeah, something like truth doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Yeah, and you can't forgive others or practice being forgiven or any of that kind of reconciliation work solo. It has to be done in a community. So I eventually rallied around and came back to a more mature perspective on everything. But even so, I didn't feel like I was called to be a pastor. 2 years after college, I did feel a call experience where I'd sensed God talking to me to be more overt in sharing my faith and bringing that into conversations in life. And my church invited me to consider that as a call experience. I entered the Iowa School of Theology and hit the ground running. I did really well in theological school. I had studied philosophy in undergrad, and so I knew how to do critical thinking, and that was easy for me. But I didn't feel like being a pastor made sense to me. I thought maybe a specialized ministry of conflict management and helping churches deal with conflict or denominations deal with conflict might be what I do. But then I started doing field education experiences and internships and realized that, oh, there's plenty of conflict in any local church, and do that kind of work all the time. So sort of grew on me and getting affirmations, and it felt right. And so I did the traditional pastoring mode for a few years. I pastored a church in Delano, Minnesota for 4 years, and then I pastored 4 small churches simultaneously in rural Iowa for 2 years.
Wow.
And then I was one of 3 pastors at a big church in Wolsey, outside of Denver for a couple of years. And now I've been in campus ministry the last 9 years here. Yeah. And actually, in this setting, I'm feeling like a sort of a niche because I get to speak my truth without kind of pulling my punches or couching things in sort of politically nuanced ways to not upset people. I can be more real, I think, in this setting, and the students can be very real, and we push back and wrestle with each other in ways that feel really, really nice. I wish more local churches could enjoy what I'm experiencing here.
Yeah, Rod, this is Bob. I'm a retired college professor, and when I used to have students come in and we would talk, sometimes the conversation would sort of meander over to religion and what have you, and I would ask, oh, what's your tradition and what have you, and they would say, oh, Christian, I'm a Christian, and I would say, well, tell me more about that, and that was kind of a stumper, and then they would say, well, I love everybody. And I thought, well, that's nice, but what about the Assumption? And what about the virgin birth? And what about, all those things that when you think of Christianity, you start thinking of those kind of things, Oh, I don't know about that, they would say. No, I don't think so on that one. But they want to love everybody. And I just want to get your take on that.
Well, it is the case that I do think Christianity at its best is about unconditional loving. Jesus clearly taught that over and over.
Sure, and that's a very Eastern thought as well.
Sure. Yeah, we don't have a monopoly on that. But unfortunately, it used to have been the case, perhaps, according to a Roman historian, that look at those Christians, see how they love. Well, things have changed so much that these days, the Barna Institute a few years back did a study of young adults asking their top 5 word associations when they hear the word Christianity. And I don't know the exact order, but it was anti-women, anti-gay, exclusive, judgmental. I'm forgetting the 5th one, but if that's someone's perspective on a movement or a phenomenon, well, why would they want anything to do with it?
Right.
Exactly.
And so effectively, the movement, at least in the U.S., apparently got hijacked in the public perception over the last 40 years or so, to the point where most young adults that I worked with are very wary of Christianity and have some wounds and some. There's a lot of people yearning to maybe be reminded that it can be a different way, which is sort of what I'm trying to fill that need.
Yeah.
But it is hard work.
Yeah.
And when I'm on campus and there are sort of interlopers from the outside who show up with big, fancy vinyl banners that say,
Street
sins,
preachers.
fornicators, drunkards, and you guys are going to hell, and like, that's theological terrorism, and they're dropping hand grenades, and I have to pick up the pieces, and they're making my job so much harder as a campus minister because of that scare into faith kind of approach, which never works and is counterproductive. Yeah,
we get that here at the MTSU campus.
Every campus
as well.
I've ever
the guy
been on.
always shows up, and he's got a camera. And he's making sure he gets all that on tape so he can put it up and say, see, us Christians are being, discriminated against. Look at that.
Yeah.
That type of stuff. And that's not it at all. I mean, it just really pokes people like with a stick, and it gets them all mad, especially women.
I'm really hesitant to use the word antichrist, but by gosh, it sure feels so counterproductive that jeepers.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the last thing that we're needing is that kind of thing happening.
What about, a lot of people say, well, I don't want to call myself a Christian anymore. I'm a Christ follower, is what.
Sure, yeah. I'm aware of that tendency, that sort of a movement to sort of say, hey, I'm a Jesus follower, but I'm not a Christian.
Right.
And there's a wariness about using that word Christian. I'm not prepared to give up that fight. Mm-hmm. I think the word can be salvaged and reclaimed in the same way that sort of the gay lesbian community has reclaimed the word queer and kind of owned it as an empowering word.
Yeah.
I'm prepared to sort of help reclaim the word Christian and show a different way of being Christian and reclaim it and own it. Now, when people choose not to call themselves Christian and simply say, hey, I'm a follower of Jesus' way, that's fine. I'm not going to spend too much time trying to argue that away from them. But I do want to make it more palatable and viable that they could actually use the word Christian, or maybe call themselves progressive Christian if they need an adjective in front of it, to kind of soften the cultural vibe. I still think it's worth. It's not a totally lost cause. We can reclaim the word, and I think it's worth trying. Now, ultimately, is it that big a deal in the big picture if people use that word or not? Probably not that big a deal. It's more important that people try to live in ways of compassion and justice and forgiveness and mercy. That matters more, whatever they call themselves. Mm. But to the extent that I can help people feel like that word can be reclaimed and does still have some meaning, I still feel like it's worth spending some energy there.
Mm.
So, Roger, I know your work is, I love to see people reforming from within. I gave up on trying to reform from within. But there is a concern that I have that Christianity won't be around in 100 years if people like you don't have the sway on taking it in the direction that is going to be something that is more sustainable than modern Christianity has been up till now.
Yeah, it is certainly something that's possible, maybe probable, that Christianity may go extinct somehow. The Valhalla pantheon of Norse gods is no longer particularly an active religion, or followers of Osiris or Isis or whatever are sort of, we read about them as old mythologies that are sort of dead religions. That could happen to Christianity. And I for a little minute or two, had some anxiety around that. But then I lost that anxiety. And here's how. I realized that it's quite possible that the United Methodist Church, my denomination, may not exist with that name by the time I reach retirement age. That's certainly a viable possibility that the denomination will implode or split or something. And my pension checks may have some different name on them than I think they might, right? So that's possible and even probable. And ultimately, if someone is dating in the dating world and they're anxious or desperate, like, oh, I really need to be married and I really am yearning, and that's really off-putting to potential suitors, right? Nobody likes to be with somebody who's desperate. So to the extent that Christians are concerned about filling the seat in the pews and trying to make their denomination survive, that tends to have the counterproductive opposite effect, because who wants to join an anxious organization? But if you have confidence and faith and not fear, if you really believe that God is good and God is big and God, you can lean and trust and lean back and rest in the goodness of the universe and God, if you trust that fully, and if you believe that Jesus' example of being willing to die is something that we might want to be aware of, well, then by those logics, we should be willing to follow Jesus and to die, because what's the worst that can happen? We die? Okay, so what? There's somehow a resurrection. There's somehow a faithful remnant. There's somehow a new way that God will be at work in the world by whatever name, promoting reconciliation and restorative justice and faithfulness and forgiveness and mercy and compassion. Ultimately, I'm not afraid, so therefore I can just move forward and a lot of fun.
Yeah, can't you get the same thing from humanism, though? I mean, that's what it sounds like, you know?
Well, potentially. Some people have read my book, Kissing Fish, and have said that it's as humanist as it is Christian. I don't consider that a negative critique. I think Jesus, he called himself the Son of Man, the Anthropos, which is the human one. And, wow, he shows us how to be fully human.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I choose to do that through following Jesus in his ways. So I call myself a Christian, but I think ultimately Jesus didn't put the focus on him. Except for maybe in John's gospel, he was always focusing the attention away from himself.
Yeah, right. Yeah, whenever we went from calling him the light of the world, and he turns around and says, "You are the light of the world." I feel like these metaphors, Roger, where we sing songs about laying our crowns down on the altar, and I see Jesus picking up the crown and putting it back on our heads.
I like that.
Yeah, so the other thing that comes to mind when I listen to you is I remember distinctly, I think it was in a Pauline epistle, where he said, "Be ready in season and out of season to give a reason for the hope that you carry," or something along those lines. And the way you're talking about practicing a very pragmatic Christianity that, when it's practiced well, is attractive and invites curiosity. So as opposed to when I asked you to sell me on it, you basically said, no, this thing sells itself when it's practiced right. And so if people are doing this thing, then maybe I'm hearing you say that my hope is that people will come to us and say, hey, what makes you tick? You guys are so giving and others-minded and loving and fun. And so you've created an attractive thing as opposed to, like you were referring to, a desperate thing that wants to go on a date tonight, or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so a lot of evangelical Christians are quick to bring up John 14, where Jesus is said to have said, no one comes to the Father but through me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And they interpret that in a gatekeeper, exclusivistic way, that Jesus is here saying that I truly am the only way, and you have to be a flag-waving Christian in order to be right with God. And I suggest that's totally missing the point of what Jesus was saying. So I tend to respond and say, yes, Jesus is the life, the truth, and the way, and anyone who follows Jesus' life, truth, and way of forgiveness and reconciliation and restorative justice and compassion and mercy and radical inclusiveness and hospitality, if they're living that way by whatever name they call themselves, and even if they've never even heard of Jesus, they are in fact on that way. And so there's no need to convert somebody if they're a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Wiccan or whatever. If they're following that way, then they're already brothers and sisters, and there's no need to convert them. And so I suggest that a lot of young adults, even though that doesn't sound like there's a platform for being evangelical, it actually becomes more compelling, because when they realize that, oh, you aren't saying you've got a monopoly, you're saying that other religions, God's at work there too, then all of a sudden that form of Christianity becomes more compelling and more interesting.
Yeah, but
so it actually ironically becomes evangelical because it isn't.
Yeah.
Roger, well, I love everything you say, but why do you need a God then? I mean, like, do you?
Well, I guess I'm wondering about. I know that you've been accused probably of being a universalist.
Well, could be.
How do you deal with that? I mean, what's your take on heaven and hell? What's the afterlife in your theology?
Interesting. All right. Think of universalism. I'm not thinking of Unitarian Universalism. I'm thinking of the old perspective of like Rob Bell sort of have landed there recently.
Right.
I think that is probably right, and there's plenty of scripture to back that up.
Right.
A guy named Barclay did a lot of exegesis to show how that's viable and biblical. That feels right to me. Although, to me, what's one's state is in the afterlife is hardly what it's about. I have a much more Jewish, I guess, perspective that I don't follow Jesus so that I can die and go to heaven when I'm dead, after I'm dead. It's so much so that I can experience salvation, wholeness, eternal, abundant life here and now, and help others to experience and know it here and now. That's where I have my focus and my interest. So for me, whether there's a heaven or hell is actually sort of a moot point and not even very much of an interest. If there is a heaven someday, and if somehow my teaching and way of living in the world and my beliefs combined somehow allow me to go to that heaven, cool. But I don't consider that the cake. That's maybe the icing on the cake, but it's hardly why I'm doing this. Yeah.
Roger, have you experienced a lot of pushback against traditional, what would you call it, evangelicals? Are they going, oh, Roger, that's not the right way, you can't do that, or something? You know, are you hearing anything like that?
Well, I do get, the United Methodist Church is a tent church, right? So George W. Bush is a United Methodist, and so is Hillary Clinton. And so, you know, it's a big, broad spectrum, and there are United Methodists, particularly in the Bible Belt states, who definitely are more evangelical. And, you know, I'm from Minnesota, and I'm serving out in Colorado, and it's much more liberal, progressive perspective on the faith. Yes, I do get some pushback and maybe even hate mail from some people who are on the more conservative end of things. No one's called for me to be defrocked or called me outright a full heretic worthy of, you know, losing my credentials or something. But I have had people come close to doing that because I'm a little bit on the outspoken side and the more lightning rod side of things. There are more moderate pastors who yearn to be a bit more progressive, and then they can quote me or point to me, and or not even quote me, but just sort of know that, hey, if this guy is out here in this far edge of things, I can take one or two steps in that direction and not look so extreme because this guy's already way out there. And I think maybe that's a role that I'm serving in the more moderate community. Although there are progressive Christians who consider me to be a bit too conventional and not progressive enough. There's not many, but there's a few who I've gotten pushback on that side of things too.
Isn't that something? Wow, because you're kind of out. Well, I wouldn't say out there, but you know, you're certainly on the left a little bit, and there are more than a little bit, and some people think it's not enough.
Well, for instance, you know, I still pray to the God that Jesus prayed to. I don't pray to Jesus, but I pray to the God Jesus prayed to. And I feel like that matters. Somehow the prayer matters. It changes things. It does matter. And I can't explain how or why or just what it does, but I am convinced it does do something, that there is this God that's a bit beyond the ground of all being, the one in whom we live and breathe and have our being. It's not just the ether of the universe. There is an agency. There is a will. There is a person that has a loving character. Metaphorically or not, there's something that I can commune and connect with and have union with beyond just sort of a material ether kind of thing. And there are some progressive Christians that I'm aware of who basically feel like it's total superstitious and unhelpful to even think that there is this being that listens to our prayers. And so I'm less progressive, if that's the word you want to use, or less extreme than that sort of mindset. Yeah.
I know as a Christian, one of the most divisive issues is homosexuality. As a progressive Christian, you come down on the side of LGBT, equality, don't regard it as a sin necessarily. Can you talk about that perspective, the Christian acceptance of the LGBT community?
Yeah, I certainly can.
So I consider myself a straight ally of the LGBTQI community, and I consider myself a Christian. And it's because of my Christianity, in part, that I have come to this place regarding those matters. First of all, I'm swayed by the scholarship of people like Dr. Walter Wink and Peter Gomes and others who have pretty well presented the case that the 6 or so verses in the Bible that have been attributed as being anti-gay, maybe at most one of them may be actually that. 5 of them pretty persuasively are either dealing with idolatry or temple cultic worship, pagan fertility rites and what have you, or pedophilia, or sort of power, unjust power, unmutually loving, sort of forced sexual encounters. And I'm pretty well persuaded by that. The word homosexuality isn't even in the Bible, was never even imposed in any Bible until about 54 or so, when the term was first put into an English translation of the Bible. So there are words that are much more vague about sexual perversion or sexual immorality that are more keenly translated as those things, and it's rather unfair to have that English word imposed onto it. On top of that, it seems rather clear that it's untenable, it's hypocritical for modern Christians, most modern Christians at least, to have a stance of being anti-gay. If you're a part of a denomination that allows people to divorce, if you're a part of a denomination that allows divorced persons to remarry, you have no leg to stand on, no theological, biblical standing to hypocritically be an anti-gay marriage. Mm-hmm. Because Jesus himself speaks out against divorce and remarriage and doesn't say a word about homosexuality. Yeah. And Christians, shouldn't we be more concerned about what Jesus is pointing out than anyone else? Yeah. So the fact of the matter is, it's an instance of scapegoating. You know, something that divorce affects 50% of the population, and homosexuality is maybe 8% of the population, and not even all of them want to get married. So to focus on that small minority group and to not look at the larger population is actually unjust, hypocritical scapegoating. It's not biblical. Now, on top of that, you know, we have the reason that the denominations have moved towards allowing for divorce and remarriage is because the context of marriage has changed. Women are no longer considered chattel. They're not property of men as they were in biblical days. Mm-hmm. And if a woman is divorced, she's no longer considered damaged goods. She's no longer, you know, a man will happily marry someone who isn't a virgin in today's context. And women are emancipated and empowered and financially doing fairly well, at least in the Western cultures. And so if a woman's divorced, she no longer has to resort to prostitution or begging on the streets to get by. No wonder God hated divorce, you know, as Jesus put it, in that time and culture. Sure. Things are very different now. And so if we, because of our awareness of the difference of marriage and women's rights has evolved, how much we should do the same with our understanding of science and how human bodies and plumbing and wiring works. Some people are, in fact, born gay. And there are 1,500 other animal species where there is same-sex sexual activity, many of which include lifelong pairing. So if it's true in the other part of the animal world, why wouldn't it be true for our own species? Yeah. So, you know, looking at sort of the scripture, tradition, reason, experience combined, I can't help but move to a place of, these are God's children, and I should love them just as they are, as God loves me just as I am, and I'm in no position to say that these people are different or wrong or lesser Christians. Yeah. And so the ministry that I serve, we became a reconciling congregation. We are
That means we're fully, overtly LGBTQ friendly, welcoming, inclusive, even to the point where we have a private restroom and we have a gender neutral restroom. And this allows people with different perspectives and identities and comfort levels to have a restroom experience that's right for them. And it's just an example of us sort of walking our talk and putting that into a tangible, hospitable way.
Well, and like I said before, Roger, may you have great influence over the church. I mean, they have such a long way to go to get to where you are, but I appreciate your effort and your work to get them there. I was noted your birth date. I'm a couple of years older, so we were raised around the same time frame. And I remember, did you ever hear of a magazine called the Wittenberg Door?
Oh, yeah, I loved it. That was one of my favorite magazines.
Me too, right? And it was so progressive, and this would have been in the 80s and 90s, and they came out with, there was an article, and it might have been Walter Wink, but it was a breakdown of the holes in the anti-gay argument, using proof texting to discriminate against homosexuality, and it was the first thing that I'd ever read, and man, it rocked my world. I thought, this is legit. This was a sound argument, and that's when my wheels began turning as far as how I was going to respond to the gay community. You don't happen to remember that article, do you?
I don't remember that one, but I remember another one in the Wittenberg Door. That it was Confessions of a Former Sodomite. And it was written by a fellow who used to be a Republican congressperson, I think at the state legislature level. And he, in this article, confessed about how he used to be a sodomite. And then he went on to explain what sodomy is. And he looks at Ezekiel and Jesus' remarks about Sodom and Gomorrah and conveys that the sin of Sodom, it was their lack of hospitality, their lack of loving kindness, and their pride and their injustice towards foreigners in their midst. And how he, at least in his mind, as a Republican pursuing certain platforms and policies, was in fact engaging in actual sodomy. And what's unfairly been called sodomy is nothing to do with what happened in that town way back then. And even if it were somehow related to sexual activity, those weren't even human. Those weren't even men. Those were angels. There wasn't same-sex interest. It was interspecies, extraterrestrial sexual fascination. So that was a very compelling article. Yeah.
Yeah, we can't even get our bigotry, the semantics of our bigotry right. So just to shift to a little more lighter note and personal note, tell us, what are some of your hobbies? What do you do there in Denver for fun?
Well, in Boulder.
I'm sorry, yeah.
I do, I guess what a lot of Boulderites do. I go trail running, I go camping, hiking, some rock climbing.
Do you have an Eno by chance, Roger?
I don't have one, but my good buddy Brian, I guess I call him my best buddy. He has one, so I forget what they're called, but I certainly sat in a lot of them numerous times. I don't own one, but I have quick access to one.
Yeah, well, my son just loves his, so that's why I brought it up. So you're an outdoorsy guy, and you got beautiful.
Yeah, I ride motorcycles. I enjoy blues dancing, which I'm getting more and more into. I play my trumpet. A couple times a week, usually under a bridge, because I sound in my own mind like Wynton Marsalis underneath that.
The echo.
Yeah, right.
I dink around on Facebook and hang out with college students and play foosball with them.
So, give us an example of one of the hardest times you ever laughed. This is a Pete Holmes type question.
Okay, so maybe recently I was sitting on a pillow that was quilted, and my grandmother made this pillow years ago, and as she aged, she was notorious for leaving needles in various things. And I've had this thing for years, and for whatever reason, I'm sitting on this pillow in my living room with some friends around me, and I'm sitting down, and I feel this strange feeling in my rear, and my eyes apparently got really big, and it took a really long time for me to. Everybody could see the gears processing in my head, and I just rise up and shout. It just took a long time for me to respond to this thing, and I couldn't believe what was happening to me. Like, really? She's been dead 15, 20 years, and this is happening now? And we just busted out laughing, and that was probably the most recent hilarious moment.
Wow. From beyond the grave. How
Yeah.
about that? Yeah.
So what do you got going on next? You got anything you want to promote, like an event or anything? I mean, not necessarily that our listeners are going to be in the Colorado area,
Well,
but
I booked, though. That's...
the book. We promote the book, yeah.
Well, I guess two things. I was just invited to speak at the Community of Christ gathering in Regina, Saskatchewan in November, and I guess they're wanting to hear about progressive Christianity, and so I've done a fair bit of speaking around the country, but this will be my first time outside of the country, so I'll become an international speaker with this speaking in Canada, I guess. And I will be working on a new book this spring. The working title is Orange Duct Tape Jesus, and I hope to have that thing out by this time next year, but I'll be doing most of the writing starting in January. And I've been invited to be a part of a book project. The folks who wrote Living the Questions curriculum have recently invited me to work with them on a new project that they're up to. So I'll probably be contributing a few chapters in whatever that new development is going to be.
Well, cool. Well, Roger, listen, I hear your life and I see the work you have cut out for you. You know, I applaud, I cheer you on, and it just exhausts me to think about it, enough to where I got out of it. But we support you saving Christianity from itself. So may your influence spread and be broadened by every corner of that tradition, so that they can survive. Yeah, really, and be.
Well, thank you, and even if I'm one of many who are engaged in this larger project, and even if it doesn't quite work out, man, we're going to have a lot of fun and love a lot of people along the way.
Oh, that's awesome!
That'll be worth it in itself.
Oh, that's a fantastic attitude, man.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for talking to us.
Yeah, thanks, Roger.
Thank you so much. It was an honor.
Okay, I'll send you a link to the podcast when it's up.
Oh, very good.
Okay, thanks, man.
See you later.
Thanks, guys.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thanks.
Bye-bye.
Because really, I don't want to take him to task behind his back.
No, I understand.
It's got to be theological gymnastics in order for him to just get back to where I think we already are.
Yeah, I wasn't kidding when I said, well, why do you need a God? I mean, everything he talked about, humanity, caring, loving, all those things, and yet...
well, it's funny. He doesn't really talk that much about God. He really talks about the man Jesus. This has got to be one of the most watered-down versions, which I think is what it's going to take in order for it to be even... slightly applicable.
And I can't imagine a Southern Baptist convention or, I don't know, any group like that getting behind this.
No.
This would be...
no, he's an apostate to them.
Yeah,
I can guarantee you that.
So I don't know.
But I love him.
It's a great idea. It really is.
For lack of my own imagination, I have just thought, how is this ever going to happen? And to me, he kind of models... a version of Christianity that could be around 100 years from now.
It could, but he also noticed, you noted, that maybe not.
Maybe not.
He went even so far as to say not possibly, but probably.
But he was talking about his denomination.
Yeah, his denomination not being around. So,
but then that right there at the end, he says, okay, let's say even if it does, we will have had a lot of fun and helped a lot of people in the meantime. So I get that.
Yeah, is he saying, well, really, it's the traditional beliefs are far too entrenched, and we can't do anything about it.
And he doesn't carry them.
No.
In order for him to be afforded the liberty to be so laissez-faire about the demise or about the future of Christianity, or even to say something like Christianity is not the only way. Other religions are legitimate in their own way. The only way he can say that is a denial of the need for salvation, which has always been the most toxic thing about modern Christianity. And so anyway, really kind of our first
interesting.
full-blown Christian minister guest.
Right.
Now, Mary works at a Christian coffee shop.
Right.
And that was owned by the Methodists, but
Right.
she herself was, just barely there. and
more
practicing.
humanist atheist.
But he's an MDiv. I mean, he's actually a scholar, and he's written books and is writing a book.
Right.
And so
it was a good one. Good to have him on, but also raises a lot of questions that we'll see. We'll see. I guess that's the best way to look at it.
Well, and I certainly don't. Well, I'm not about to become as Christian as he is, but it's so watered down that it's at least I'm amicable with that. Like I could shoulder up and be friends with somebody who walked that walk. Well,
Absolutely.
Roger, I could be friends with Roger.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it sounds like he could be friends with me as far as his religion wouldn't forbade him
Right.
from hanging out with
Good
atheists.
point.
So
There you go.
okay, peace out.